On a forgotten highway cutting through the frozen heart of Kansas, a desolate little diner stands alone, like the last remnant of a bygone era. Everwind Café, its name faded on a rotting wooden sign, was once a warm stopover for wandering truckers. Now, only a faint pink light spills from its window, flickering through the sky-thickening snow. Marcus Bennett, a 45-year-old black man, stands silently behind the counter, his large frame wrapped in a threadbare flannel coat, every line on his face, from the silver creeping into his hair to the thick, calloused hands, bears witness to years spent on the road. He is no longer a trucker, but a night watchman guarding the dream he once built with his late wife. That dream has since shattered, leaving him and the cold, empty diner facing the looming threat of foreclosure. Then, one night, amid a howling blizzard, the unexpected happened. 10 young drivers, lost in the white chaos, knocked on the door of Everwind Café in desperation. Without a second thought, Marcus opened the door to them. He offered shelter and the last remaining portions of food in the kitchen. He had no idea that such a simple act would become the turning point for everything. Inside, the diner is a living memory, frozen in time. The cracked red leather booths, the half-filled napkin holders, the empty pastry case polished to a shine as if scrubbing away its emptiness. The scent of old coffee still lingers, not pleasant anymore, but persistent, like memories that refuse to fade. On the shelf behind the counter, an old CB radio lies silent. It once carried the voices of a connected world, now just a dusty echo of the past. Marcus has lost track of how many times he's wiped the counter without looking. The motion isn't necessary. It's a survival instinct, clinging to habit to stave off despair. The clock reads 6:45 p.m. Just 15 minutes left before he can flip the closed sign and head upstairs to the small loft above, where nothing waits but cold silence. And it's that silence he fears most. This place once echoed with Trina's bright laughter, the woman he loved more than life. There used to be the cheerful hum of an old jukebox, the smell of fresh pies in the oven, the clatter of dishes in joyful chaos. Now, only the groan of the heater remains, and the creaks of an aging building weathering its countless winters. Marcus scans the room, the chairs askew, snow-tracked footprints fading beneath fresh dust, the scent of fried food and lemon cleaner. Once the very definition of home, now whisper of things slipping away. He moves slowly, checking the cash register, $2,530.80. He stacks the bills with care, as if to show respect, though they're worth little now. Not enough to cover the overdue electric bill, and nowhere near enough to touch the final bank notice tucked under the counter, a letter he no longer needs to read because its every word is carved into his mind like a curse. The thought of foreclosure hangs heavy in his mind. He closes the drawer, the soft click sounding like a quiet ending. His eyes settle on the dimly lit open sign in the front window. The switch to turn it off is only a few steps away. Maybe, he thinks, tonight will be the last. He could pack up anything still worth selling, unload the old equipment, and leave Everwind to the snow and the silence of memories. Outside, the storm thickens, snowflakes slashing sideways in the wind like icy needles, piercing every layer of clothing. Marcus watches the snow slap against the window, feeling a cold emptiness bloom in his chest. This place once offered refuge, once breathed life with every bit of warmth from the stove, every echo of laughter through the room. Now it feels like a heavy anchor tied to his feet, dragging him deeper into the numbing waters of debt and loneliness. And still, he doesn't flit the closed sign. Maybe somewhere in the left side of his chest a spark still burns. Stubborn pride, or just a last shred of foolish hope. Trina, his late wife, used to call him her oak tree. Steadfast, unyielding, standing tall against the snow. He can almost hear her voice, soft and teasing. "You're still standing, aren't you?" "Just one more night, Bennett. One more night won't kill you." A sharp gust slipped through the doorframe, making the wind chime rattle unexpectedly. Marcus spun around, heart pounding. He wasn't expecting anyone. And then, there, standing in the doorway, was a stranger. He was shaking snow off his boots. Tall, around Marcus's age or maybe a few years younger, bundled in a thick navy coat and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. His shoulders were dusted with snow, his face flushed from the cold, a short beard frosted with ice. The man hesitated at the threshold, the storm howling behind him. Then he stepped fully inside, closing the door and sealing off the chaos behind him, as if ending one wild chapter. His presence seemed to shift the very air in the diner, like time had paused, then turned a page. "Evening, boss," he said, voice rough from the cold or from too many years on the highway. "Still open?" Marcus felt a lump catch in his throat. His first instinct was to say no, to repeat the line, "Sorry, the kitchen's closed." But something about the man, the heavy weariness he carried like a second coat, made Marcus stop. "We're open," he said, surprised by his own words. "Coffee's still hot. Kitchen's open a few more minutes. Sit wherever you like." The man gave a small nod, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He stepped toward the counter, leaving a trail of snow behind him like a ghost who had wandered too long in the storm. Marcus poured a steaming cup of coffee and slid it across the worn wood. Then he glanced at the clock again. Only 5 minutes left until closing. 5 minutes until he could switch off the lights, lock the door, and wrap up the old dream. And yet, somehow, the lights in Everwind Café stayed on. Marcus didn't know why he'd agreed to stay open just a little longer. Maybe it was the memory of winters past, of strangers quietly walking in from the storm and changing everything. Maybe it was Trina's voice whispering in his ear, or maybe it was simply this truth. When a light is lit, it ought to stay burning, if only to guide a lost traveler through the white night. The man was halfway through his coffee when the wind chime rang again, sharp and sudden in the thick silence of the storm. Marcus looked up, frowning, as 2 more figures pushed through the door. Hunched over, coats dusted in snow, they looked around like survivors surfacing from the depths, blinking into the warm light, and the scent of scorched coffee mixed with soft lemon cleaner. The scent of the first shelter they'd found after fighting the cold for who knows how long. One of them looked toward Marcus with quiet hope in his voice. "You've got any coffee left, boss?" he asked. Voice hoarse from the cold, maybe from emotion too. Marcus felt something shift inside him, slowly, stubbornly, like a long-sealed door cracking open. He pointed toward the counter. "Still hot, kitchen still open." And then the door opened again, and again, and within 10 minutes, nearly half the booths were filled. They were truckers. Marcus didn't even need to ask. The heavy jackets, snow-caked boots, weather-beaten faces, and the weary eyes of people who'd driven through miles of endless white. Some of them looked like they'd been battling the storm for hours, maybe all day. Marcus recognized that look. He'd worn it himself back in the days of roaming up and down Route 42, back when a diner like Everwind could mean the difference between a safe night and a deadly accident. They came in pairs, in small groups, carrying the bite of the storm on their coats, and the same silent question in their eyes. It didn't need to be spoken. Marcus saw it clearly enough. "Are you still open? Please, don't turn off the lights." The first man, his name was Sam, Marcus would learn later, naturally stepped into the role of leader. He brushed snow off shoulders, passed menus down the counter, kept his voice low but steady, like someone used to managing chaos. Marcus worked the coffee machine like a man awakened from a long sleep, pouring cup after cup, one mug barely empty before another filled. His body moved on instinct to the kitchen, where old motions returned like muscle memory, flipping toast, stirring eggs, pressing burgers on the grill. The toaster clattered with crisp slices of bread popping up, and suddenly Marcus realized it had been years since he'd cooked this much. "Highway's closed about 6 miles back," Sam said between mouthfuls of eggs and hash browns, voice raised just enough to cut through the low murmur in the diner. State troopers shut it down both directions. Snow's coming down heavy all the way past Milford. Might not open till tomorrow if the wind dies down. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He glanced at the window. The night had become a thick, impenetrable curtain. The headlights of parked rigs outside were now faint halos in the swirling storm. If the highway was shut down, these people, these strangers, weren't going anywhere tonight. He thought of the space heater groaning under the strain, of the freezer already low on supplies even before the night had begun. And then he remembered Trina's voice. Gentle, patient, she'd always reminded him this diner was never just a business. It was a place to lean on, a home for those who needed one. That night, Everwind Café wasn't just a roadside diner in a snowstorm. It became a promise, a quiet light on a white lost road for anyone still wandering through the cold of life. Tara, the young waitress, burst in from the freezing storeroom, cheeks pink from the wind. Marcus had told her not to come in that day. No customers crazy enough to venture out in a storm like this, he'd said. But Tara, stubborn as a mule, just like Marcus and Trina once were, showed up anyway, smiling with a shrug that said it's no big deal. Now she moved briskly between booths, pouring coffee, clearing dishes, offering warm smiles and a few jokes that lightened the spirits of the shivering drivers. She darted behind the counter, leaned into Marcus and whispered, her hands red from washing dishes too long. We're almost out of everything. I found some stew meat and a few frozen pies, but after that..." Her voice faded. Marcus didn't need her to finish. In his mind, he saw the invisible ledger, full of numbers no one could hide from him. Inventory, electric bills, gas, wages, all burning red. He wiped his hands on a towel, the weight of winter pressing down harder on his broad shoulders. 12 men, maybe more, were still out there, looking for shelter. The freezer was half empty, bills unpaid. The heater could die at any moment. And yet, when he looked around the room, at the way those men hunched over their coffee like it was the last lifeline they had, the way they curled into the booths, slowly thawing under soft lights and the scent of sizzling onions, Marcus understood something without having to reason it out. He couldn't send them away, and he never would. Marcus made his decision the way he always had. Swift, firm, unwavering. He turned to Sam, who was sipping his coffee like it was the last sacred comfort left. "Do you guys have anywhere to sleep tonight?" His voice was low, steady, resolute. Sam shook his head, eyes drifting toward the window where snow had swallowed the road whole. "Hotels are all full. Closest one we saw was packed 2 hours ago. We figured we'd probably sleep in the trucks." A few chuckles, thin, tired, rose from nearby booths, but Marcus didn't laugh. He remembered too well what it felt like to sleep in a truck cab in winter. The cold that seeped into your bones and clung to you for hundreds of miles after. "No," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Not in this cold. You sleep in your rigs? You won't make it to morning." Sam started to object. Male pride was a tough thing to push against, but Marcus raised a hand, firm. "I've got a little apartment upstairs, 2 beds, some floor space. Not much, but it's warm." He swept his eyes across the room, every wall, every chair, each one etched with memories of Trina and a life once full. Then he nodded, speaking more from his heart than his mouth. "This café's still open. You can stay as long as you need." A strange silence settled over the room. Only the wind howled outside, and the gentle clink of a coffee cup meeting porcelain filled the air. Then Sam stood up and reached across the counter. "My name's Sam Rivers," he said. "And you're a good man, sir." "Marcus Bennett," Marcus replied, gripping the outstretched hand with a strength that surprised even him. "Well then, Mr. Bennett," Sam said with a slow, warm smile, "like the first sunrise after a long, dark night, looks like you just saved a bunch of stubborn men from one hell of a night." And in the Everwind Café, the lights stayed on. The door remained open. For the first time in many years, Marcus Bennett felt, just maybe, he didn't have to stand alone in the storm anymore. He stepped into the narrow kitchen with a renewed energy, as if his soul had just been reawakened. Every motion was practiced, instinctual, forged from decades of cooking and survival. He opened every cabinet, mentally drafting an inventory like a firefighter preparing for battle. Tara was already beside him, no summons needed. She pulled out a box of pancake mix, a sack of potatoes, a few dented cans of chili, and a frozen bag of chicken wings Marcus had forgotten existed in the freezer. Not much, not enough to run a full kitchen all night, certainly not for more than a dozen storm-bound men. Marcus felt his chest tighten, a cold worry like a knot pulling tight inside him. But he pushed it aside. Tonight wasn't about profit. It wasn't about ledgers or finances. Tonight was about right and wrong. Tonight was about not letting good people freeze in their trucks while he sat warm behind a locked door. A sizzle echoed as Marcus dropped beef onto the grill, followed by slices of bread. The smell of cooking meat filled the room. Not just the aroma of food, but a signal, a lifeline in the dark. The conversation began to quiet. The drivers lifted their heads, their noses catching the scent like waking from a frozen trance. A young man, barely 25, approached the counter, both hands wrapped around his trembling coffee mug. It wasn't just the cold. "My name's Caleb," he said, voice shaky, eyes full of worry. "It's my first solo trip, sir. Are you sure there's enough food? I don't want to be a burden." Marcus wiped his hands on a towel and looked at the young man. He saw the struggle in his eyes, between pride and fear, between youthful confidence and quiet doubt. He remembered himself, those winter nights parked on the shoulder, a flicker of light in the distance, and the question that always lived inside his heart. Is there someone kind enough to keep the light on for me? "You're not a burden," Marcus said, his voice firm, each word landing like iron in the warmth of the café. "You're the reason this place exists." Caleb nodded, swallowing his tears, and returned to his table, his shoulders a little straighter than before. Marcus went back to the grill. His hands flipped meat, spread butter, worked without pause. His mind raced even faster. How to stretch the ingredients, how to warm every soul while keeping the kitchen running. Just a few more hours. Tara slid a notebook beside him, already sketching out meal ideas. Down to the last can, the last half-empty bag of pancake mix. They didn't have much, but maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. Chili-slathered burgers, scrambled eggs, canned peaches for those who needed something sweet to soothe the soul. Tara listed everything, eyes locked on the stew she stirred. Marcus nodded silently, but his gaze said it all. "We'll make it work. We have to." Another gust of wind howled through, making the windows shudder. Outside, the storm roared like a wild beast, clawing at the fragile walls of the diner. Marcus shivered as he imagined what might have happened if he'd flipped the closed sign earlier. If he had turned off the lights, locked the door, and sent those people back to their trucks, left to the mercy of the freezing night. Just the thought of it made his gut twist. That wasn't how he was raised, and it sure as hell wasn't the man Trina had loved. "No," he thought, wiping sweat from his brow and sliding another burger onto a hot plate. "When someone knocks on your door during a storm, you open it. You feed them, you give them shelter. No counting the cost. Just count yourself lucky to have something left to give." Every booth was packed, the counter lined with plates and mugs, the air buzzed with the sound of life, the clink of silverware, soft laughter, conversations that weren't loud or cheerful, but the kind shared by people who were getting through something together. Tara, cheeks flushed, a few strands of hair escaping her bun, moved like she belonged here. like she'd always belonged. She floated between tables, refilling coffee without being asked, her eyes scanning each face as if they were family. Marcus stood behind the counter, watching her, and a strange swell of pride rose in his chest, the same kind of pride he'd once felt long ago, standing beside Trina behind this very counter. Outside, the storm howled louder than ever, the windows rattling like they might give way. But inside the diner, the light stayed golden and steady, like a stubborn star in the freezing night. Marcus moved through the room, his broad hands firm yet gentle, his voice low and calm as he asked each person if they'd had enough to eat, if they needed anything else. No one was left alone. That he made sure of. And for the first time in a very, very long time, he didn't feel alone either. Not tonight. Not in this place. Time passed, as if dissolving into the steam of coffee, the flicker of lights and the soft murmur of voices like waves against the soul. Marcus kept pouring coffee, clearing plates, asking the occasional question, but mostly he listened. For years, Everwind Café had echoed only with memories, with voices of the past. But tonight, real voices, real life, poured into every brick, every tired plank of wood, like a healing balm. Caleb was the first to speak, the young driver too new to carry the dust of the road with confidence. He sat in a corner booth, a half-eaten plate of scrambled eggs in front of him, spinning his fork like it held the weight of a secret. Finally, he cleared his throat. "First time hauling solo," he said quietly, like a confession. "Didn't think I'd get stuck like this on night 2. A soft ripple of laughter rolled through the diner, not mocking, but knowing. Marcus saw Sam exchange a glance with an older driver across the room, a look filled with empathy. "You're not a real trucker yet," said a burly man near the counter, his voice rough as a whetstone. Marcus knew him as Henry, a man with a face like worn saddle leather and a wooden chair that creaked in protest every time he leaned back. "First time I got stuck in a blizzard. I had to sleep in the drainage ditch out front of a bait shop in Montana. Best sleep I ever had, until a state trooper banged on my window at dawn." The diner burst into real, full laughter, warm, honest, the kind that melts snow inside hearts. The walls between strangers started to fall, like ice giving way to the heat of shared understanding. Stories followed, tales from the road, flowing like a freight train through memory. Some were funny, some reckless, some so sharp they carried the scent of diesel fuel and burning rubber. Sam recounted a brake failure coming down Black Mountain, praying every second to make it into the runaway ramp, tires smoking, heart pounding out of his chest. Another driver, Rick, wiry with a wild, talkative beard, told of being trapped in a Texas dust storm, trading half a tank of fuel for one hot meal at a rundown shack that somehow had terrible coffee but the best apple pie he'd ever eaten. Marcus leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Just listening, hearing them laugh, hearing them speak, that was enough. A little while later, Henry's voice rose again, cutting through the relaxed air. way up in Nebraska, off Highway 83. The owner was an old driver, retired. Man, he made the best cornbread I've ever tasted. This place reminds me of a diner I stopped at once, he said, tapping his coffee cup. What was it called? Caleb asked, lifting his head with curiosity. Henry squinted and thought, something like Bennett's or Ever something. Everite? Someone guessed. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest, but said nothing. He kept listening. Sam, who had been flipping through a stack of old photos tacked to the wall behind the counter, suddenly stopped. He reached out and gently touched a faded picture. A group of drivers lined up outside a sunlit diner, arms slung around each other, grinning like kids. You mean Everwind? Sam turned to Henry. Everwind Café? Marcus stood a little taller, feeling his ears burn, as if 100 long nights and 1,000 miles were pressing against his chest. But his voice was soft. Still me, Marcus Bennett. Henry snapped his fingers, eyes lighting up. That's it, Everwind. How could I forget? That damned place got me through more close calls than I can count. Sam looked at Marcus and smiled. Nichtheim, her owner's name was Marcus Bennett, wasn't it? Though he already knew the answer, his voice carried a quiet certainty, as if confirming it not just to the room, but to the silent man standing behind the counter. The air inside the diner seemed to pause. A stillness hung where every breath, every glance suddenly recognized. The quiet man who had kept the lights burning all night, who had cooked the final meals from scraps. He wasn't just some diner owner. He was one of them. Part of the road, part of that unspoken brotherhood that required no uniform, no border. Only miles and the sacred rule. When the storm comes, good people don't turn away. Sam laid the photograph down as if it were something holy. Places like this, people don't forget, he said firmly. And they sure as hell don't forget a man like that. Other voices began to rise. Memories, long buried, now flooded back like a rising tide. One man spoke of a night Marcus stopped on a Missouri road to help resecure a cargo load before the wind could tear it loose. Another recalled the floods in the south when Marcus drove a rig full of water and supplies across raging rivers when no one else dared to go. At the far end of the counter, a small woman, eyes sharp as glass, shared a story of a calm voice over CB radio, guiding her down a frozen mountain pass she'd been certain would be her last. The stories piled one on top of another, like planks reconnecting a broken bridge, until Marcus could only stand in stillness, his heart almost breaking. He'd never expected anyone to remember. He'd done those things simply because they felt right, just like tonight. The room slowly quieted again, but this was not the hush of silence. It was the silence of reverence, of a bond deeper than words. Marcus felt taller, as though the storm inside him was retreating too, his hands unclenched, The weight on his shoulders, the one he'd carried for years, eased just enough for him to breathe a little easier. Outside, the wind still screamed, slamming the walls in one last trial. But inside the Everwind Café, only warmth remained, among people who were once strangers, now something more. Among shared memories on scratched wooden tables, among lights that refused to go out. When dawn came, the snow softened into a silvery mist, drifting like smoke across the frozen lot. But the snowdrift still towered, nearly touching the window panes. The highway was a rumor, buried under a white sheet that had yet to crack. Inside the Everwind Café, the world had become a cocoon, a warm refuge of chipped mugs, cracked wooden tables, and a dozen men who had survived the night together, not just with warmth, but with memories, with laughter, and something Marcus had nearly forgotten. A sense of belonging. Around 9 a.m., the sound of engines rumbled from the lot and heads turned. A few drivers moved to the frosted windows, wiping away the fog and squinting into the dimming snowfall. Marcus followed, heart pounding. He thought, maybe snowplows, another traveler stuck in the storm? But what he saw made him blink, then blink again. A convoy of trucks was rolling into the lot, headlights slicing through the snowy haze like twin blades parting the dark. The engines didn't roar, they declared. First one, then 3, then 7 massive rigs pulled in, trailing behind each other, ice-crusted sides gleaming like armor. Logos and company names adorned their flanks. Many Marcus didn't recognize. More trucks lined the highway beyond, idling patiently, waiting their turn, with the calm patience of those who understood. No place mattered more than this one right now. Sam was already at the door, struggling to wedge it open against the frozen frame. The cold sliced in like a blade, but Marcus didn't feel it anymore. He followed Sam outside, others falling in behind them in silence. One by one, drivers stepped out of their cabs, boots crunching the ice below. Marcus realized not all of them were from last night. There were new faces, some younger, some older, even women among them. But they all wore the same expression, steady, ready, as if they'd known their role before the day began. They formed a half circle around Marcus, no instructions needed. Sam turned to face him, his breath fogged in the cold. He didn't speak right away, just smiled, warm as embers glowing beneath the ash, then nodded toward the line of trucks. "We made a few calls," he said, his voice rising above the wind and rumble of engines. "Told people what happened last night, what you did, what you built here." His voice grew rough, but he continued, clear and firm. "Turns out, Mr. Bennett, you're a bit of a legend out there." A few chuckles rolled through the group, but they were filled with respect, not humor. Marcus felt his throat tighten, his hands clenching at his sides without even noticing. A man stepped forward, jacket stitched with Porter Logistics, and offered his hand. "I'm Will Porter. I run a fleet up and down this corridor 6 days a week. We're always looking for good stops, places that treat drivers like people, not wallets on wheels. I'd like to make this diner part of our regular route. Meals, rest, fuel. We've got about 50 trucks, and if word spreads, there'll be more. Before Marcus could respond, a silver-haired woman stepped up next, regional coordinator for a supply company, then a third, then a fourth. And tracks, dedicated routes, food supply deals, long-term partnerships, promises to send people keep the café alive. Because they needed Everwind Café just as much as Marcus had once needed them. Sam pulled a thick envelope from his coat pocket and placed it in Marcus's hand without ceremony. "It's donations," he said simply. "Drivers, small companies, folks who remember someone leaving a porch light on for them once. Should be enough to pay off the bank and maybe restock the freezer." Marcus stood there, speechless. The snow still fell gently behind him, and in his heart a fire had been relit. He accepted the envelope, hands trembling despite the numb cold. It was heavier than it looked, not just paper and money, but meaning and recognition. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a rough sound came out. Half laugh, half sob. An older driver stepped forward, beard thick, eyes bright as headlights. In his hands was something wrapped in a worn piece of canvas. "Found this in my garage last night," he said, handing it to Marcus. It was an old CB radio handset, scratched, dented, but still gleaming faintly beneath the years of dust. "You gave me your backup unit back in '97 when mine died outside Cheyenne. You said you'd always keep the channel open. Figured maybe it's time it came home." Marcus took the radio in both hands, like holding something sacred. Every scratch told a story. He returned to the counter, where the old radio base still rested silent all these years. When the handset clicked into place, it made a soft sound, just enough, like the final piece of his life falling into place. Sarah wiped her tears openly now, not bothering to hide them. Sam slapped Marcus hard on the back, nearly sending him forward. Kevin, the young driver Marcus had helped change a tire for a few months back, stepped forward, hands trembling as he unrolled a large sheet of paper. "We had a little idea," he said, eyes cast down. "Hope you don't mind." The paper turned around. It was a design for a new sign. "Everwind Haven, a light for every traveler." Marcus stood still, his eyes blurred. Each letter swam in the soft morning light. He thought of Trina, of the nights they dreamed together about this place. Not for money, not for fame, but because they believed in a world where someone would open their door when the storm came, trusting that one day someone else would do the same for them. Behind him, the CB crackled to life, a hiss of static, then a voice, warm and clear, echoing from somewhere out on the road. "Breaker 19, anybody picking up Everwind? Heard the lights are still on over there." Marcus leaned close to the mic, heart pounding, his voice steady as a transmission tower. "This is Everwind," he said, his words rolling across miles of road, through snow, through the quiet pockets of the world. And the lights are still on. 1 year later, Everwine Café was no longer the weary roadside diner battered by that storm. But if you look closely, you could still see the old bones, still hear the stubborn heart beating beneath its fresh coat of paint. The parking lot had been expanded, room for 20 semi-trucks to rest. New pole lights burned all night long. A small lounge had been added to the side for drivers. Hot showers, soft couches, a few worn pool tables donated by drivers. Better here than gathering dust in the basement. Inside, the cafe had been renovated, not stripped and changed, but restored with dignity. The counter gleamed with a fresh coat of varnish. The leather booths were patched and holed again. The walls were painted a soft cream that brightened the space, yet the floor still creaked with the weight of old stories it refused to let go. But the biggest change wasn't something you could see. It was something you could feel the moment you stepped through the door. Everwind was no longer just a diner. It had become something more, something alive, a true home, for those who measure life in miles, in hours, and in long, quiet roads that stretch between destinations. Laughter returned, steady, gentle, like a stream trickling through the walls. The scent of bacon and strong coffee wrapped around you like a warm blanket. And through it all, the old CB radio kept humming. Voices from every direction rolled in. News, greetings, jokes, road warnings. A living soundtrack from people who now saw Everwind as an essential stop. Have you ever dreamed of a place like that? If this story touched you, leave a thought, share it with someone you care about, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to help us keep spreading stories that inspire.